No matter what your age, I'm sure you have felt the uneasiness of being home alone. Normally, there's people there with you, but not tonight. After the movie, you climb into bed. Do you usually hear those noises? Did you just see somebody walk by your window? Join Mr. Davis and I as we share with you 5 true Home Alone horror stories. I was home alone one night when I was a teen. Everything was fine until I woke up in the middle of the night to get some water. I walked out of my room, down the stairs, and as soon as I hit the bottom landing, I saw that there was a figure sitting in the old chair in our living room. I stood there for a few seconds, completely in shock and terror. The person sitting there began to move and stand up. I turned and fled back up the stairs. I ran back into my room and slammed and locked my door. Completely in tears, I sat on my bed in the dark, staring at the door. My dad appeared at my door not 10 seconds after I closed it and asked why I just slammed my door and what was going on. I opened up for him, and in between my sobs, I told him I saw somebody downstairs. I asked if it was him, and he said no, that he had just come from his bedroom right next to mine. It was just the two of us living there. He checked the house and found nobody except an old-looking business card for this hotel in our city. It was tucked between the cushions of the chair. He checked into it, but nothing became of it to my knowledge. It was the scariest night of my life.
I was living in the country when this happened to me. I was a teenager and it was late at night. I was the only one at my house. I was walking through my house at some point in the night, and through a back window I saw a person standing in my backyard out by our fence next to the pasture. I don't remember what time it was, but it was definitely late enough where this made no sense, and it was very creepy. The person appeared to be looking at me, and for the first few seconds after I saw them, I was so scared that I couldn't move. I looked out at them, and then they started moving. I squinted my eyes to see more clearly, and the person was slowly walking towards me. This triggered me to move again. I went back into the kitchen where I just was and called my parents. They told me that they were already on their way home and were almost there. This was music to my ears, but I was still very nervous. I peeked around the corner to look out the window with the phone still in my hand. To my absolute horror, the person was standing at my back door. I freaked out and told my parents to hurry. My dad told me to go outside and run down the driveway, but my mom interjected and told me to stay inside. I opted to listen to my dad and opened the front door and started springing down the long driveway. As I ran, I could see my parents' headlights, and I felt safe when I met them in the road. We all sat in the car deciding what to do, and my mom called the cops. They took a long time to get out to us, and when they escorted us back to the house, none of us found anyone, and it didn't appear that anyone had entered the house. Nothing became of it, but damn, I really did see somebody out there that night, and it was the scariest thing to see. Like 2 years after I saw that person, I walked over to my dad, who was talking to a neighbor at our front door. I had never spoken to the person, but I said hello, and noticed that there was another person sitting in their car out in the front of our property. The person sitting in the car was the same person I saw that night. I almost had a heart attack.
I was with my brother and his friend when this night started. Our parents were out and about, and it was just the 3 of us there. We were playing video games for a while before David, my brother, and his friend Alex decided to leave and go back to Alex's house. I told them I didn't want to be alone, but they just laughed at me and made me feel like a sissy. The plan was for them to stay there with me, but Dave called our parents and they said it was okay. When they left, I was a bit creeped out. I didn't like being home alone, especially at the age of 11. I called our parents again once they had left to see how long it would be before they got home. They told me an hour or so, and so I just decided to play more games before they got home to keep my mind occupied. I was pretty into the game I was playing when I heard David and Alex outside the dining room window, messing around, trying to scare me. Even though I was sure it was them, it did scare me. I got up and yelled at them to stop and to just come inside. I told them I just got a new high score and they should check it out, but they didn't respond to me at all. A minute later, I saw them walk by the window, and I grabbed the phone and called David's cell number. When he answered, I about threw up because I could hear Alex's mom arguing with him in the background, and the TV was on really loud. I didn't quite know what to say or do at first. I was so scared. The figure stopped at the window again, and then they tried to open it. After that, I told David there was 2 people outside of our house. I ran to my parents' room, which was dark, and ducked down next to the bed in the corner. David was asking me questions, but I didn't understand him. I told him again to come home. He did sound scared on the phone. Thankfully, he never hung up, but all the lights in the house suddenly turned off. I could hear him telling Alex what was happening, but I tuned them out. I was listening for noises. I really felt like this was the end of my life, and I swear, parts of my life flashed before my eyes. I wondered what my friends at school would say. I wondered who would show up to my funeral. All these thoughts in a split second. I heard a window break, and hallelujah, I forgot we had an alarm system. It started blaring, and I couldn't hear David on the phone anymore. I sat there in the dark. The noise eventually was silenced, and I heard a voice call out, "Hello?" I somehow could tell it was a police officer, and I made my way back to the foyer. I guess the 2 would-be intruders left after the alarm went off, and my parents didn't show up for another 30 minutes, even after the cops had called them too.
When I was 13, I lived with my older brother and my dad. One night, I think it was a Friday, my brother and dad were both gone. My brother was out with his friends and my dad was out on a date, if I remember correctly. So I was home alone. This wasn't a big deal. It happened pretty often. I was playing Resident Evil 3, I remember, when very abruptly, somebody started shaking the front door handle to my house. I was sitting in the living room playing, and this happened right next to me. Of course, at first, I thought it was either my brother or my dad, until somebody started messing around with the back door. I got scared and just sat there in fear. Nothing like this has ever happened before, and I didn't know what to do. The 2 people at the doors began to aggressively try to open them. I could hear the person at the front door was a man, and he was making grunting noises. I got up and ran into my dad's room in the back of the house. I turned off the lights and then climbed into his closet. I covered my body with clothes and lay down in the closet when I heard the front door burst open. I was very scared, as you can imagine, and I remember I was trying to breathe as quietly as possible, which seemed impossible. I heard the man walking through our small house and let the person in the back in. They walked through the house and eventually opened the closet door. I held my breath and they didn't know I was there and moved on. They left after about 5 minutes, and when I gained enough courage to come out, I saw that they had stolen some electronics. My dad's laptop, a camera, and some DVDs, I think. I called my dad and he came home right after. I was left home alone many times after this incident, and thankfully, nothing else ever happened. I've always wondered what might have happened if they found me in that closet.
This happened on a Friday. I was in high school, and I had just walked home after school. I walked into my house, and my parents weren't home yet. This was typical. They got off work at 5, and I was always home alone for a couple hours after school. I was sitting in my bedroom watching TV. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, and my bedroom door was open. As I was watching, someone walked by my bedroom very fast and scared the living shit out of me. I'm an only child, and I knew that whoever had just walked by was not supposed to be in my house. I got up and thought about jumping out of my bedroom window. I was very creeped out and decided that was probably the best idea. I opened my window and crawled out. Luckily, my bedroom was on the first floor, and when I hit the grass, I turned around and looked up at my window, mortified that I'd see somebody standing there or somebody about to jump out after me. Relief. Nobody was there. I ran to the gate, and the damned lock was so old and rusted, it made so much noise trying to undo the damn thing to open it. I got it open after making so much noise and ran to the street and started going down the sidewalk. I stopped, and my heart sank when I realized I had changed my pants into gym shorts when I got home, and my cell phone was still in my jeans pocket. There was no way I was going back inside, but I did start walking back toward my house, and when I reached it, I stopped and tried to see somebody through my front window. Of course, I didn't. I walked up to my front door and very quietly opened it. It creaked open very slowly, and as soon as the door stopped, after hitting the closet door behind it, I heard somebody say, "Get out." I sprinted away and called my dad at the grocery store that was kind of close to our house. He came to the store to pick me up, and I told him we should call the cops, but he wasn't afraid, and he just walked right into the house when we got home. Nobody was in there, and he assured me that he checked everywhere. I only went inside when he said he was 100% sure there was nobody inside the house. Early the next morning, I woke up because my bedroom was freezing. I sat up, and my window was wide open. It was winter, and there was no way in hell I would leave it open the way it was. I told my dad, but he of course didn't really believe me. My mom seemed a bit creeped out because she could see how serious I was. Whoever had walked by my bedroom was still in there. They were in my room while I slept. I really hope you enjoyed this collaboration with my good friend Mr. Davis. If you have not been to his channel yet, I highly recommend it. He has many videos, and all of them are very much worth a watch. If you'd like me to be able to make videos more often, then please check out my Patreon page by clicking the link on screen now. Don't forget to subscribe, my friends. I am just getting started.
So this happened around Christmas time a few years ago. I had taken my 5-year-old niece to the mall to get her picture taken with Santa. While we were there waiting in line, I noticed this little old man and lady sitting on a bench, watching all the kids waiting to see Santa. The old man came right up to us and told my niece that she looked very cute. I told him thank you, and he went right back down to sit on the bench next to his wife. We got the picture taken, and were waiting a while for the picture to be printed. I asked the photographer why our picture hadn't been printed since it had been such a long time. He told me that my mother had already taken it and pointed at that little old lady who had been watching us in the line before. I went after the old man and presumably his wife and demanded they give me the picture back. The old man seemed embarrassed and told me his wife had grabbed our picture by accident. She said she had meant to take their granddaughter's picture instead. He very swiftly apologized, but I still had a weird feeling in my gut that something was not quite right about these two. Next, I took my niece to the merry-go-round, and like magic, the old people appeared there too, still without any kids alongside them. The lady waved at my niece and smiled this big, toothless smile at us. At this point, I had decided it was best if we now left the mall. I took my niece to get lunch at her favorite restaurant that was almost all the way across town from that mall we had been at. Because of this, I felt much more relaxed as we had lunch, completely forgetting about those weird old people from before. As we were driving home though, my niece spotted this playground that was close to a different, much smaller mall. She begged and begged me to stop at the playground and play. I could see there was already a young man there with his little boy on the swings, so we weren't alone. Another car pulled into the parking lot shortly after we got there. We played for a little while when I noticed that no one had gotten out of that car yet. I looked over at the driver's side of the car, and sure enough, it was those exact same old people. They had followed us from the mall to the restaurant and then to this playground. The old man was now staring straight at me and my niece, almost like he was hunting us. I noticed that he had his arm down and was moving it up and down as well. It clicked that he was masturbating in his car. I didn't want to scare my niece, so I subtly alerted the young man who was also there with his son. I got my niece into the car quickly and drove into this mall's parking lot. I then called the cops and the mall security. I didn't want to stick around long enough for my niece to see this man getting arrested, so instead I gave the cops my number and left to my dad's work. I figured there we would be safe, just in case those old people decided to follow us again. The cops called me back a few hours later and told me that by the time they'd gotten out there, the couple was already long gone. They were looking for the description of the car I'd given them though. It makes me physically sick every time I think about the fact that these old people are out and about and seem totally harmless when they're actually pervert sex offenders, or even worse, possibly kidnappers. This occurred many years ago, but it will forever stay with me and change my views on allowing my kids to ever have their own separate phone line. It was a few weeks after Christmas, and my parents had got me my own personal phone with my own separate phone line as well. That was the cool thing back then, way before cell phones were big. I had given my friends the number, because who wouldn't do that, right? Anyway, it was about 3 a.m. or so. I had been deep asleep when my phone suddenly began to ring. I thought to myself, that's odd, who could be calling me this early? We all had to be up for school in the morning. I answered it, thinking it would be one of my friends, but all I could hear was deep breathing on the other end. I laughed it off as someone just messing around with me, and I hung up the phone. I tried to return to sleep, but as soon as I started, the phone rang again. This time I actually answered it. Who is this? Nothing, just deep breathing again. At this point, I was beginning to get very irritated. I told this person to stop calling me from then on and hung up once again. I laid down again for about 30 minutes when my phone rang once more for the third time that morning. I was so mad and sleepy as well. I screamed out into the phone. This isn't funny. I'm trying to sleep. I have school in the morning, so stop calling me. This time, there was a reply though. It was a man's voice, very gravelly. He laughed at me. I can see you. You're very pretty. Why don't you come out and play in the snow with me? With that, I hung up and started crying. I ran to my parents' room and woke up my mom, telling her what had happened. She woke up my dad and made me tell him everything. Now, they were both up together. My dad went into my room and checked the windows and everything. He made sure all the locks on the doors were locked as well, and proceeded to tell me it must just be someone playing a sick joke. Everything would be fine. He told me to just unplug my phone from the outlet. Finally, I managed to go back to sleep until my mom woke me up for school. I got up and started getting ready. I opened my blinds to my window that led to the backyard when I noticed on this very frosty morning that there were handprints all over my window. I called my parents in there, totally freaked out obviously. My dad immediately called the police. The police came out to take a report and look at the evidence. They decided to go into the backyard to check as well. Sure enough, there were a fresh set of footprints in the snow that led right up to my window. They had gone from the front of the house to the back to my window, back to the back door, and back to the front door. The police think the guy had tried to get into the house that night. Before I tell you this story, let me give you some background information. This happened a few years ago, when I was 13 years old. I live in a small town, and near my house, about 3 blocks down the road, there's a large network of fields and woods, where lots of people go walking. I usually walk through the woods and across 3 fields to get home from school. It was winter, and obviously in the winter it gets dark very early. I was late back from school that day. I had detention for back-chatting the teacher in my math class. Anyway, I guess that's beside the point. The point is, I left school and it was already getting quite dark. The school I go to was about 1.5 miles away from those fields. Now, at the time, no one was around in those fields because it was so dark. It was late and honestly very creepy in my opinion. I suddenly had this feeling, like in my subconscious. It was in the back of my mind in a way, and it was urging me not to go that way no matter what for some reason. Now, I've always been a very paranoid person. At first, I did consider this, but it was quicker to get home if I walked through the fields and trees. Yeah, it would save me a good 40 minutes of walking along the pavement. I got through the first 2 fields, then there was the woods. It was very dark. Darker than the fields, obviously. I'm not ashamed to admit that I was quite afraid in that moment. I'm still scared of the dark. I figured, hey, I'll just walk fast, then the dark of those trees will be behind me, and I won't have to do this ever again. I made my way into those trees walking very fast. That's when things got scary though. At first, I heard breathing behind me. I thought it was just from me walking fast, as I'm not the most sporty of people in the best of times, and I had just walked 2.5 miles. I thought not much of it until I heard a stick snap behind me. I knew I hadn't snapped it because it was from further behind me, not from under me. I was internally freaking out at this point. First the breathing, then a twig snapping, then footsteps, very distinct footsteps. They were much heavier than my own, and they seemed to be trying to keep pace with me but failing. I'm guessing that's what the guy was trying to do, exactly match my footsteps. Well, that had failed. I took off into a run. Then it was obvious if it hadn't been before that I was being followed. I heard a man's voice call out from behind me, "Hey, kid!" The only way I can describe what I felt in that moment is that my entire body went cold. I don't even understand why it did, but I felt a fear for my life. I feared for my life because I was now being chased. I was super tired from walking so far, and I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer. I took a glance back. The man who was chasing me, from what I could see in my brief glances, looked to be in his 40s. He was wearing a white, torn, dirty t-shirt and ripped shorts. I think he also had sandals on. As soon as I got to the edge of the trees, I did not stop running. That guy chased me all the way up until the edge of the train bridge that I had to walk over before he disappeared back into the trees. At this point, I was in tears, shaking and choking because I was so exhausted. I walked slowly after that, regaining my breath best I could. The road I had to walk along connected to a grassy hill with a stream, a path, and trees on either side. As I looked down, that guy that had chased me was standing by the small wooden bridge next to the stream, staring at me. I could tell he was grinning, even from how far away I was. There was something in his hand. I had seen it while he was running after me. It was silver and glinted slightly. I think it was a switchblade. The way his face contorted, it gives me chills to even think about it, let alone write it down. I eventually got home and ran to my mother in tears. I was barely able to tell her what had happened. I said enough though, and she called the cops. They searched the woods, and in the end they found nothing. I never saw that guy again, at least until about a month later, when I was walking to school with my friend. I went the long way now. There was no way I was ever going to walk through those woods again. As I was walking though, I saw that guy. He was on the other side of the street wearing old clothes, and his hair was dirty as hell. I just kept my head down in fear of being recognized. My friend asked me what the hell I was doing. I didn't tell her anything though. I just said I was afraid of people with greasy hair having nits, and she laughed. No need to scare her with my experiences with that guy. If this has taught me anything though, it's to not walk alone in the woods in the dark if you can help it. There's so many places people can just hide in plain sight, especially if it's dark out. You don't want to be caught alone like I was. I've recently moved to a new area due to my work, and it's quite far away from my family and friends. It's this weird kind of cul-de-sac area. I'm currently working on finding some new friends here, but I work Monday through Friday and visit my parents on the weekend, so needless to say, it's a very hectic schedule. I start at 7 a.m. and finish around 6:30 or 7 at night. You can imagine that when I get home, I just want to eat and go to sleep right away. One day I came home and there was an old couple standing outside my door. They introduced themselves as the couple that lived directly opposite my house. They even handed me some home-cooked dinner. I said thank you and mentioned that I would invite them in. There were still a lot of boxes everywhere, and I was quite embarrassed that they had to see this. I told them I'd recently moved to this new city on my own for work. We small-talked for a few more seconds, and soon I was inside my house. I honestly put that food they had given me in the fridge and thought I'd just head straight to bed. In the morning, I saw the food that they had given me half-eaten and now stored in the sink. Must have been way too tired last night to remember eating this. The next night, I'm coming home from work when I see the old lady waving at me from her kitchen window. I vaguely waved back and headed inside. Nothing else happened that night. The next night though, I had the shittiest day I'd ever had at work. I had to stay behind to work a half hour over due to an unhappy customer, and I'd been craving my bed all day long. I pulled up outside my house, only to see the old couple now standing outside as well. Are they keeping a record of what times I come home? I quickly asked myself. I was honestly not in the mood for creepy-ass neighbors and making small talk again. I didn't know these people, and I didn't know or understand why they were trying to socialize with me. Plus, with the day I've had, I was not in the best of moods. I braced myself for whatever lame conversation I was about to have. Getting out of my car, I just waved in their direction and started fumbling in my purse to find the keys to my front door. "Excuse me, miss, would you like to come over for some dinner? You look really tired." The old lady called out to me. I vaguely said something about me being too tired while generally getting really annoyed. They just wouldn't let up though. I opened my door and was just about to step in. The old guy rushed across the road and even placed his hand on my arm. He looked me dead in my eyes and said something cheery like, "My wife makes the best pie, you know." Okay, whatever. I thought I'd go over for a cup of tea and some pie and maybe try and nicely explain to them that I'd had a shit day and I just really needed to head home. Hopefully, they would take the hint. After shutting the door and stepping into their house though, the old guy slammed the door shut and locked it behind him. They both proceeded to tell me that around 7:30, they had been looking out the windows for me by chance, to give me some chicken stir-fry they had cooked up and saved for me that night since I'd been so tired lately. They had both clearly seen a man standing in my bedroom window, walking downstairs. They could even see him in the living room window walking through the kitchen. When they'd seen my car pull into the cul-de-sac, they saw him rush back past the living room window and obviously up the stairs to hide. They called the police, and they'd tried to stop me from entering my house. Whoever this was, they were clearly still upstairs, now hiding for me. My heart fell. I felt dizzy. I glanced to my bedroom window, expecting to see someone there, but nothing was there. Just the curtains, left wide open. The police turned up shortly thereafter. I had to wait outside while they searched the home. In the crawl space right outside my bedroom door, they found a homeless man curled up. He'd been living there for the last 2-ish weeks. According to him, he had snuck in when the moving packers had left the door open while struggling to move something in. He had been in the house watching me while I had been asleep and would come out while I was at work and away for the weekends. So here's a bit of backstory first. I live in a neighborhood with lots of abandoned houses. There's about 12 houses in my neighborhood, and over 7 of them are abandoned. In one of those abandoned houses, there's a playground in the backyard that some of the old neighbors left behind. Now, I was 12 at the time, and I knew in my brain I was a little bit too old to be playing on a playground made for 6-year-olds. But what can I say? I just couldn't resist a nice swing set. I would spend some of my extra time over there. It was summer, and I usually would just play video games. The house was just past some woods you had to walk through, about a block away from my own house. It was a normal day out. My mother said I should go get some fresh air outside, and then she was tired of watching me just sit there and play video games. Well, little me thought it was the perfect opportunity to go and swing on that swing set. It was beautiful outside, not too hot heat, but warm enough with a slight wind. So I slipped my shoes on and walked down to the forest. As I was just about to take maybe a few steps in, I heard a branch snap behind me. Now, I hear these all the time from squirrels bustling about, so I really didn't think that much of it. I finally finished walking through the forest and reached that old house. I opened the back fence, lock it, and start to swing myself. I had swung for about 2 minutes or so when I began to hear breathing. I stopped for a moment, trying to think of where the hell that could possibly be coming from. After about 30 seconds of stopping, I forced myself to think it was just me, as I was going pretty high. I continued to swing for another 5 minutes when I decided that I was done for now. As soon as I sat up, though, I heard a, "Hey." I looked around for a moment, only to notice a man about mid-30s or early 40s, dirty, gross black hair that was all over the place, a stained-up sweatshirt, and underwear with the back cut out so I could see the outline of his butt. This guy was obviously homeless and had a crazy look in his eyes. Here I am, a 5'2", 95-pound kid with no strength at all, staring down this 6'2", 170-pound man. As tough as I could, I deepened my voice and said, "What's up?" The guy stared at me and started to smile. After 15 seconds, which seemed like 40 minutes, he said, "You have room for one more?" I quickly said that I was actually leaving, but the swing was all his now. The man opened the gate, walked past me, sat down, and started to swing. I sped walked to the gate and slammed it shut. I started walking into the forest. About 20 seconds later, I heard a loud, "Get the fuck back here!" I heard the gate spin open, and I could hear him sprinting not far behind me. I practically shat my pants. I started running as fast as my little legs could carry me. I somehow made it back to my house and locked the door without the man noticing where I'd gone. I told my mom practically in tears, and she called the police. The police searched around and came back a couple of hours later with no one. That night I was tossing and turning in my bed when I began to hear footsteps out in my street. I looked out the window, only to see that man peeking through the windows of every single house along my street. I started to shake as I grabbed the phone and called the police without even telling my parents. The cops showed up a few minutes later and caught the man. They didn't give us a whole lot of information, but a few days later the cops called. They told us the man had a mental illness and had been living in one of the abandoned houses for a couple of weeks now. He was planning on kidnapping me and doing God knows what. My dad, younger brother, he was 7 at the time, and me, I was 14, went to the bush to camp. I live in Australia, and if you look up a place called One Tree Hill, I was a few miles/kilometers out from there. We drove for a while until we found a clearing. On the other side of this clearing was a dirt road that dipped down, then went uphill again. We set up camp on the edge of that clearing, with our backs turned to the dirt road. We spent the whole day hiking around the area, and even ran into a small family on the way back. It felt like a really safe area to be in because of this. Eventually, it was getting quite late in the afternoon though, so my dad started roaring up a fire. We roasted marshmallows and drank Coke, telling silly stories until about 8 p.m. At that point, I told my dad I was going to get a little bit of shut-eye. I go into the tent, and my little brother decided to sleep in my tent as well. After a little while, though, I realized I couldn't get to sleep for some reason. I decided to go back outside. My brother woke up and begged me not to go, but I insisted I just needed some fresh air and I'd be back in a minute. I went and sat a few meters from camp, looking at that dirt road, thinking about all the things we were doing tomorrow. The dirt road had pretty much all the moonlight hitting it that night. As soon as I noticed that, on the right side of the dirt path, I could see a shadow so tall and skinny coming right for where we were. Our big fire was still burning strong, and my dad and brother were fast asleep. I didn't think too much of it at first, maybe just another family approaching or something. I rested against a tree and sat there for a moment. I looked down at the path again. The shadow was still there, but now there was a person connected to it. All I could see was a silhouette from the distance between them and I. Then the next thing the figure did sent an icy chill all over me. They started to dance. They were dancing like the best song they'd ever heard just came on, only it looked horrible because of how tall and slender they were. They began to dance closer and closer to the campsite. I was frozen with fear. All I could do was silently cry. This person danced all the way up to the fire and started warming their hands on it. They hadn't seen me yet, as I wasn't in the camp itself. I could see him better now with the light of the fire against him. He had dark, broken leather shoes, pants that were way too short for him exposing his ankles, a long brown coat, and a cowboy hat. He was even still dancing while warming his hands. He flashed a glance at the tent my brother was in, then stood in front of it for what seemed like an hour, just watching, waiting. I decided this was the time to go and wake up my dad. I very quietly did a circle around the camp until I was next to my dad's tent. I unzipped it slowly and stepped inside. Little did I know, around the same time that mysterious man had entered my tent as well. I shook my dad awake and told him there was a strange man in our camp watching our tents. My dad perked up so fast, he threw me his cell phone to call the police. He got out this long wooden stick, which we'd used to cook the marshmallows with, and walked over to my tent. "Hey, you fucking bastard, I know you're in there!" screamed my dad. The man suddenly let out a shrill scream and came bursting out of the tent. He took off sprinting down the dirt path. I was on the phone with the police in that area already. They had heard everything in the background and told me help was on the way immediately. 2 cop cars pulled up and assessed the situation, then escorted us back onto the highway. We all went home at 1 a.m. in the morning. We never went back camping in that area. I was told they commenced a search during daylight hours. One officer only found the hat he was wearing, perched high up on a tree branch. I also just quickly wanted to share my brother's perspective of the situation as well. This was his words. "I was waiting for you to wake up because I was scared. I saw the tent open. It didn't look like you, but it was so dark I couldn't really tell. I asked for your name, and I remember he said in such a grisly voice, 'Nice to meet you. My name is Howard.' He then tipped his hat and began to touch my ankle. That's when Dad intervened. Ever since that night, my brother has an extreme trauma anytime he sees a cowboy hat, and he absolutely cannot speak to people named Howard. We've all not been camping since." This is a lengthy story, but I didn't think I could really leave out any details. That's my apology ahead of time. This story takes place over a period of time while I worked as a cashier at an Asian fast food restaurant during high school. I was one of our best workers and always very friendly to the customers. Therefore, I basically had to work all the time. On one of our slower days, a man came into the restaurant when it was only one of my managers and I working the floor together. This man had quite the impressive beer belly, a set of teeth which would make any dentist cringe, and ice blue, bloodshot eyes. He explained he had never eaten there before and was just passing through for a few days. He was a truck driver apparently, and waiting on a shipment or something. Being the customer-friendly gal I am, I gave him some suggestions and made some small talk, like I do with all of our customers. Well, this man decided to take the small talk to a completely new level. He began to openly talk about his drug abuse and how the trucking company gave up drug testing him because he would constantly fail. Okay, how nice. Being reasonably freaked out now, I eventually got him away from the cash register to sit down at a table. I usually stayed behind the register and busied myself, but because we weren't busy, I served all the food and cleaned all the tables. Therefore, it was easy for him to keep making conversation with me. He kept on asking me these random questions about places he could visit to pass his time, or whatever topic he could come up with on the spot. Along with that, he prolonged his visit there by constantly ordering cups upon cups of our wonton soup. Arguably, it is some pretty good soup, but I'm positive it was because he wanted an excuse to stay and talk with me. Once he finally left, my manager and I joked about how strange that all was, and then we went on with our night as usual. On the following day, we were extremely busy during lunch hour. I was working on overdrive, trying to get through this long line of people. I was completely preoccupied when lo and behold my drug addict trucker friend comes up to my register. He told me how much he'd enjoyed the food the previous day, and also how much he enjoyed my company specifically. Major red flag. Before he left to find a seat, he told me he'd definitely be back up at the register again to talk to me and order some more wonton soup. Great. Needless to say, I avoided the shit out of him the entire time he was there, even though he kept trying to speak to me whenever I passed and was constantly looking around the restaurant for me. I stayed the hell away from this guy. A little bit later, my intimidating badass manager and I were at the cash register, doing our own thing, when I couldn't help but constantly notice this man looking at our entrance. All of a sudden, he left in a hurry. When he returned, I asked him what that was all about. He proceeded to tell me my good pal kept entering in and out of the restaurant, pacing outside our windows and staring at me. He had left to tell him to fuck off. At this point, I was so scared I couldn't even contain myself. Shaken up, I completed my night at the restaurant. I was reassured when I remembered it was his last day in town. He apparently lived in New York, which was pretty damn far away from the Midwest where I live. I truly believe this would be my last ever encounter with this creep. Months passed by, and I had put the incident to the back of my mind, when all of a sudden you-know-who walks up to the door higher than a kite. My stomach dropped and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up immediately. He walked right up to the register and immediately confronted me. I was literally pissing myself at this point. I asked what he would like to order. He ignored my question and kept on repeating to me, "You don't remember me?" over and over again. I thought it would be best to not play into whatever fantasies he had. I said I did not. I tried again to ask what he would like to order. He told me a cup of wonton soup, and he'd be back to order more. All the while, in between every breath, he would mutter, "You really don't remember me?" It was obvious he was high on something. I ignored him and verbally pushed him to sit down. Before he left, though, he looked at me with this yellow, crooked smile. "I'll see you soon." All the people I was working with that night were pretty big guys who were very protective of me, so I did feel a little bit safer. On the inside, I was still in shock, though. I told my one coworker the entire story. He said he would walk me to my car after closing. Oddly enough, the man left pretty much without saying a single word to me his entire visit, which did not sit well with me at all. When 9 p.m. hit and I was done with work, my coworker held up his promise and walked me out to my car. As we were walking, we suddenly heard an angry voice muttering closely behind us, along with steps gaining speed. In no time at all, my coworker turned around and pulled out his pocket knife. He waved it for the man to see in the dark and screamed at him to fuck off or else he'd slit his throat. All of a sudden the man freaked out, turned around and sprinted in the opposite direction. My coworker continued to walk me to my car and calm me down, seeing how shaken up I was. I drove home completely paranoid and hysterical. I was in utter amazement of what could have happened to me right then and there. For other reasons, I quit my job not long after, and I've never since seen that disgusting man again. To this day, though, I can't help but feel uneasy whenever I pass by a truck. To this creeper's delight, I'm sure. I will, in fact, never forget him. So this happened earlier this month. I'm not sure how much danger I was actually in, but it definitely creeped the absolute shit out of me. Give it a read and see if it creeps you out as well. I was working a job out of town that had put me up in this hotel. The hotel was nice and all, but because of some snafu, the rest of the crew was staying in one on the other side of town. This, needless to say, made after-work beers much less convenient. The fact that this hotel was almost completely vacant except for me as well just added to the weird factor. Anyway, about 3 days into this gig, I was too tired to meet up with everyone else that night. I was not too tired to go drink a beer in the hotel hot tub though, which I proceeded to do by myself, like some sort of lonely, wet alcoholic, I guess. I'm feeling pretty good and slightly buzzed after a relaxing soak. I was drying off when I began to hear this strange sound. It was very hard to describe, kind of like a bulldog struggling to breathe or something, very animal-esque. Since the hot tub area was outside, I started looking around, expecting to see a wounded raccoon or something. To my surprise, though, the source of that noise came rounding the corner. It was a man, shirtless, shoeless, a super jacked dude with long hair and these crazy eyes. The kind of eyes that are vacant and say I'm out of my mind on something or both. He was snapping at the air like a dog, making these strange animal sounds. Now, I'm also a dude, and while I'm not the most pacifist guy ever or anything, I'm also not a fan of just getting into fights with crazy people after getting half a buzz in a hot tub on a work night. I started to discreetly put all my shit back on, trying not to acknowledge this weirdo or make any eye contact. I exited on the opposite side of the caged-off pool area. As I'm exiting, I sneak a quick glance at my new friend here, only to see him pulling a harmonica out of his pocket. I heard him begin to mournfully play it as I was walking away. Then it got even weirder though. I turned a corner and had to walk along one side of the building and across a courtyard. Then I had to turn another corner to get to the elevator that would take me to the far-off safety of my room. As I'm going along, I hear this harmonica song getting louder and louder. I'm looking around again, expecting to see him behind me, but I can't see him anywhere. The music keeps getting louder though. My head is on a damn swivel. As I finally get to the elevator, I slam the button, and as soon as the door opens, the music suddenly stops. I think that scared me more than anything. I turned around, ready to see the man jump at me, but there was nothing there. I backed into the elevator and punched the button for my floor, like it had just made fun of my mom or something. I got up to the 3rd deck and just about sprinted to my room. As the door was slamming behind me, I could hear that harmonica music start up again. I sat there with the deadbolt on. I could hear the harmonica on and off at various levels of volume throughout the night. This happened around 9:30 or so, and the last time I heard it was around 2 a.m., shortly before I fell asleep after staying up in terror. I didn't see the guy again for the rest of my stay. I'm not even sure if I'm overreacting or what, but I still get goosebumps. thinking about that wild-eyed dude just patrolling this huge, nearly vacant hotel, playing his little song on the harmonica.